Welcome to the Monday Monologue, and today I want to talk about what I love about tube amps. And there's several things that come into play here that I really think that a good tube amp brings to a hi-fi system that you just don't get with a traditional solid-state amp. With a traditional solid-state amp, let's talk like one of those vintage Marantz receivers that they do sound really nice. You're stuck with whatever that receiver sounds like. I mean, all amplifiers, in my opinion, have like a house sound. And it doesn't matter whether it's a Kenwood or a Pioneer or Marantz or any of those amps from that era, they do have a signature kind of sound that was engineered into the amplifier, and that's what you get. And to try to figure out which one you like, you're buying, $1,000, $1,500 vintage amps, and then hopefully you're getting one that was recapped or done in a way that didn't alter the sound, and trying to find, this big unit that you're replacing as a whole until you find the synergy with your speaker, your source, your room, and your personal taste that gives you that live sound that we're all searching for. And I've talked about this before. The sound that I found that I really am reaching for and trying to find, whether it's from a phono cartridge to a preamp to a phono stage to the amplifier, tubes, whatever, is that outdoor concert sound. Probably one of the most enjoyable concerts that I ever went to was I went to an outdoor concert over at Chastain Park here in Atlanta of Steve Winwood when they were doing Back in the High Life. And yeah, that was wow. I mean, I just remember hearing that Freedom Overspill song. I think that's the title of it. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about hearing that in that outdoor space, in that kind of bowl where it was just this huge sound that was also just airy, and it was like a clear night with no clouds and the stars were out. It was one of those magical experiences. And that's one of those things that, when you experience something like that, you want to replicate it or experience it again. And that's what I feel like I'm searching for when I'm tuning a system or when I'm, trying different gear. And it's like, yeah, that's getting there. And that's what those Quad S2 speakers brought to my system over the Clip speakers. And while I know some of y'all laugh, I still think those Clips RP600Ms are a killer deal for what they sell for. And if you're looking for the under $500 new speakers, when those are on sale you can find them for $350, or you could, you're not going to beat the sound that they give per dollar. But those Quad S2s brought this life and realism to my system that I was missing and searching for. And back to why I love tube amps. Okay, so I think I found some speakers that really fit. Same thing with my phono cartridge. When I went from that 540 ml to that OC9 MXL or whatever, they're both microline stylus. That was a huge jump, going from like a elliptical stylus to that microline type stylus was a huge transformation in what my vinyl sounded like. Again, when I started doing those 834 clone phono preamps, that's when I realized how really good vinyl could sound. And I know, Darlington Labs and some other folks make some really nice preamps that you can get that goodness out of a phono stage. So I'm not trying to tell you that only my phono preamp can do that. There's other ones out there. But you're not going to get it with a $150 phono preamp. That's just not happening. Or even a even a $300 one. Those I've listened to those little i-fi, listened to Ship Manny 1 and 2. I've listened to some of these other, what I consider kind of budget phono preamps, and like none of the ones that are built in to the turntables are going to get you there. So we got the stylus, we got the phono stage, we've got the speakers. Now we're at the amplifier. And what's awesome about tubes is you can tune the sound to your preference by putting different tubes in the amp. And that's kind of the last step to me in the process. And I made the mistake in the past of like tube rolling when I didn't have a really good phono cartridge, or when I didn't have really super revealing speakers. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. If your budget's limited and you're like, yeah, let me try some of these, $30 tubes, or like if you want to play with those PSV and Horizon tubes, or if you want to try some of the more budget-friendly kind of new old stock tubes, maybe some gold lines, or you want to put a 8-pin and 9-pin adapter and try some like 12AX7s instead of a 6SL7 in an amp. That's all great stuff, and it's fun to play with. But I really feel like until you get your system to a certain kind of place, tube rolling may not seem to make a big difference. And I've heard people saying that, and I know I was in the same place a couple of years ago when people would say, well, your system's not revealing enough to hear the difference. And of course, that it's easy to get defensive and say, what do you mean my system's not good enough or whatever? But there is some truth to, until you get some speakers that really can pull details out of the music, some of this stuff you may not hear. And I was at the same place with speaker cables. I didn't think they made any difference because my system was in a place where when I changed the cables, I didn't hear anything. So I'm like, hey, this doesn't make any difference. But now I can. And that, to me, though, is what makes tube amps so great to use in a home hi-fi system, is you finally get to like this point, and then when you start swapping tubes around, you can find that magic. And you can hear just like the sound stage open up, and you can hear sounds coming from the speaker that are like 3 feet past where the speaker's sitting, where with other tubes it pulls it back in. And you start hearing the layers to the music. You start hearing the individual instruments, or like even in a chorus, you kind of start hearing the individual voices blending together instead of just one kind of noise, if that makes sense. And while I have found that swapping IC or op amps into these little chip amps is a similar kind of thing, and I just did a video about changing the little IC chip for these discrete op amps like a Burson and a Sparkos, there was some tuning there that happened. And before that, when I had this chip, I had a preamp that had tone controls on it, and that's not the same thing, guys. I know people are saying, you don't need to be tube rolling, just get a one of those shit Loki or some kind of parametric equalizer or whatever, and you can tune that same sound. No, you can't. You can't EQ soundstage into a system, and you can't EQ in the synergy that certain tubes have together. And like on my 300B amp, I had been listening with these Gold Lion 300B tubes with the Sylvania new old stock 6S and 7 driver tubes, and it had a pretty good sound to it. I mean, it sounded, it was not bad by any means, but I started playing around with different 300B tubes, and I tried the Shuggy Treasure 300B-Z tubes. And then with those, the Sylvania tall bottles were okay. They were a little on the mellow side. And so I swapped in some of those 6.8HC Soviet tubes, which surprisingly for how cheap they are, those are really lively sounding tubes. And to me, that combo sounded better. And then these PS Vane CV181 tubes came out. They sent me a pair of those to try. And I put those in with the Gold Lions, and it was a little too edgy. But when I combined those with the Shuggy Treasure tubes, there was some magic going on. It brought out some detail in this open air sound that I've been searching for in a way I hadn't heard out of that amp before. And this was after I put some ISO Tango output transformers in it. That was another huge transformation. And I know there's a lot of talk about things like coupling caps too, and I really like those Mundorf aluminum oil caps. If you've got different caps in your amp, then the tubes that I'm using may not be the same synergy. And I know some people think you can, again, get like a DSP, or you can start, tweaking different things and replicate what's happening with tube rolling and capacitor changes and those kind of things. I personally don't think you can. That it just doesn't have the same effect, and it doesn't have the same purity and transparency of sound, that it just feels like there's kind of a layer of something going on. Now again, I'm not using a DAC and digital sources. So if you've got a DAC and you're, using a DSP with a DAC and you've got a digital source, and then in that process it's going to be converted to analog, that, yeah, it might work in that scenario. But I feel like when you start putting things in the signal path that's full analog, when you're using a turntable or a tape deck that was recorded off analog, that's a pre-recorded tapes that were done from analog recorded music, that it just does something to it that's not good. So back to my 300B amp. So I tried those PS Vane Horizon 300B tubes. And I'll be honest, with the PS Vane driver tubes, with my amp, with my coupling cap, it was too edgy. Now, it's possible with, some copper foil, maybe some of those old Soviet coupling caps, that the paper oil ones, it would have sounded good. So I'm not going to say that that's not a possibility. But with the Mundorf caps in that circuit, with those transformers, with these speakers, that was too much. And so I went back to the Sylvania tall bottles that were mellower. And it's interesting that the Sylvania tall bottles with the PS Vane Horizon output tubes has a similar sound to the Shuggy Treasure tubes with the Horizon tubes in the front end. So it's got that same kind of synergy in. So I ended up liking the Horizon driver tubes with the 300B-Z output tubes and went with that. And I'd also bought some Shuggy Treasure. They were like the CV181-Z, the black coated tubes. And those with the Shuggy tubes didn't sound great. And even with the Horizon tubes, didn't seem to be any kind of magic going on there. It was still a little too edgy. So George at Tubes USA just sent me some EML, the handmade deals that are pretty high-end 300B tubes. And this was just their basic, not the mesh plate, or just kind of the regular 300B tube. Put those in, and I had the PS Vane Horizon driver tubes. Definitely heard more bass, and I heard more kind of body to it, but it was too edgy. And then when I went back to the Sylvania tall bottle, new old stock, too mellow. It was too kind of rolled off and rounded kind of, yeah, the top end just kind of disappeared. So went back to the Treasure CV181-Z black coated driver tubes, and that amp's never sounded that good. I mean, I feel like now I'm there. And obviously, we're going to keep going. I mean, I'm not going to give up on this hobby, because part of the fun of this is in search of that holy grail sound. And this is as close as I've ever been. And this is the same amplifier with 3 different combos of tubes that some people maybe that don't have a trained ear wouldn't really hear the difference in. But to me, it's very apparent where this is headed. And it's in a good space. And I'm really liking what I'm hearing. So, can't do that with these. You can swap in the whole chip, change the sound, and then that's what you're stuck with. With a tube amp, you can swap the driver tube versus the output tube combo, and that combination may or may not have the synergy that you're looking for. And I just think that's really cool that that's something we can do with tube amps. And in the past, I've said that I've never been able to hear the difference in rectifier tubes. And now I'm starting to wonder, now that I'm at this point where I'm really getting close to that live sound that I've been looking for, if I'll be able to hear the rectifier tube. And that'll be for another video. So anyway, this has gone a little longer than I thought. Sometimes I kind of do multiple things. But yeah, trying to get some of these projects caught up. We just finished up, or almost finished up, with the R8 output transformer swap. Another super, super nice improvement in that amp. I know it's expensive, but hey, you know, if you're doing this as you go along, I think it makes sense. So go watch that video. Might be worth doing if you've got an R8. Still think the iron is critical. You gotta have good iron in a tube amp to get good sound. So don't skimp there. So anyway, hope you're enjoying this content. If you are, please subscribe. Please like the video. Thanks to all you Patreon supporters and you other folks that support my channel in various ways. And we will see you next week for the Monday Monologue.